Hey everyone, welcome to Topic UFO. We've got a great guest on tonight. Gary from Oklahoma is here tonight on the phone with us, and he is going to be talking about really three different subjects: Alienology, Angelology, and Demonology. And I have a feeling that by the end of the interview, we'll see how those three subjects come together. But I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm just going to bring him on, and we'll get talking about this. So, Gary, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Gary.
Hey.
How's it going tonight?
Going good.
Great.
Yeah.
So, Gary, you're here tonight to talk to us about three distinct different topics: alienology, angelology, and demonology. Am I supposed to understand that those somehow all three go together, or will we get to that later in the conversation?
Yeah, I think we'll get to it later on, but sneak preview is, yes, I would say there is a deep connection between the three, and so we'll just kind of see how it unfolds. But yes, that would be my short answer on that one.
Great. Well, listen, Gary, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about how you got into the whole UFO alien phenomenon?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it goes back a ways for me. About age 10. Now, this is in the 1970s, but age 10, I think I'm fourth grade, whatever, but I get a little book called The Gizmo from Outer Space, kind of a funny title. Of course, it's written to the fourth grade level, but it had a distinct UFO topic that it dealt with. I mean, basically, the boy finds a gizmo. It's a radio communication device, and he communicates with aliens. But the illustrations are interesting because he has his best friend with him, and they're at their desk, and they've got their crystal radio set, and one of the books that's sitting on their desk is a little book called UFOs in the Universe. I don't think that book actually exists, but anyway, so yeah, that little book was kind of the introduction for me into this subject. I didn't really see it as that. I was just reading it as a fun book, but by the age of 30, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's what spurred your curiosity
yes.
At the very beginning, huh? Okay, great.
Yeah. And then by age 13, now this would be 1977, and I don't know how old you are, but in 1977, I'm 13 years old, and I'm already buying a few copies of Saga's UFO Report magazine. That was a popular magazine back there, and back then, and off the newsstand, I would buy it, at the little market, and so I'm reading stories about UFOs and aliens, and this is also at the time of the Carpenters. If you remember, they had a hit single called "Calling Occupants from Interplanetary Craft." So they're singing that, and then 1977 November, Close Encounters of the Third Kind come out. Now, I'm sure you've seen that.
Absolutely. One of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, and in fact, recently I was with my brother and dad, and we were kind of surfing through the television, and in between basketball games, and we watched half the Close Encounters, so I kind of got a reintroduction to Close Encounters. But anyway, so at that time, I'm 13, and I'm also clipping newspaper articles because UFOs were being reported on fairly commonly at that time, and so I'm clipping newspaper articles. And then in the winter of 1978, I'm outside alone. I'm home alone. I'm home, and Dad and brother are at my brother's baseball game, and I'm looking at the stars. I have an interest in amateur astronomy even back then, and even today. I've got a telescope today. Back then, I'm pretty much just naked eye and sometimes binoculars, but I'm outside observing stars and wishing to see one of those lights in the sky. And in the west, I see two red lights pulsating. And I'm fairly familiar with the skies and also the air traffic, because we're close, or at least we're in the lane of the Tulsa International Airport, and we live in a suburb of Tulsa. But they would come over close to our house, and so I watched airplanes, and this somehow looked weird. This object coming from the west, going directly east, coming toward me. And so I run in the house really fast to get my pair of binoculars. And by that time, this object, and I'm going to call it two objects because at first they look just like the red pulsating lights on a Cessna airplane, maybe, on the edges of each wing. That was probably the distance, it seemed to me, apart that these objects were. But when I put the binoculars on the object, I see that there's no airplane, there's no anything. I mean, you just have these two pulsating lights that are very strange. And then the biggest thing that really caused my hair to go up on my skin and back of the neck was there was no sound. I mean, absolutely no sound. We lived in a suburb, very quiet back then, and our little town was not very many people, so there weren't machines or anything running. But I mean, there's absolutely no to this object. And so, by the time I get the binoculars on it, look at it for a few seconds, it's about over my head at this time. It begins to bank right even with my backyard, and so it banks south. So it's coming west-east, makes this very slow banking 90-degree turn, not 45, not 33-degree. I mean, it's a 90-degree turn that it makes, so that that takes out the possibility of one of those candles in the plastic bag gags that they used to do in those days.
Right.
But you know what I mean. So this object was weird, and so it makes this banking turn, and then I just watch it disappear into the south, and and all the time I'm giving this international peace sign to it, hoping that this thing would stop and land. But looking back, I'm glad
but no luck, huh? It didn't happen.
I'm glad, because I'm not sure what would have come out of that thing.
So
anyway,
when you saw this object, I take it that was your first UFO or true UFO experience, right?
Yes.
And what kind of feelings did you have? I know you were young at the time, but what did it make you feel like?
Well, for one, I didn't think it was man-made. I had this distinct feeling it was not man-made, not only because of my observations. Number one, it had made no sound. And number two, when I look at the lights, I mean, there's nothing in between the lights. I mean, they're just two, if you want to say, globes of light pulsating. And so, I mean, it's dark in between. I mean, it's pitch black between the objects. And so, not only that, but I just get the distinct feeling that this object was not of our Earth, and so that's probably the biggest feeling I had about it. Looking back, even now in my many years of thinking about it, I still don't think that there's a military source to what I saw. There always could be, because mine didn't make any fantastic, maneuvers like so many of them, have been reported to do. But
right.
The silent thing, I have heard ufologists say that in the 1970s we had no silent craft, in the skies, and so I'm pretty certain that it wasn't man-made.
Now, did you tell anybody? Did you tell anyone in your family about it? And if so, what was their response?
Well, yeah, it was interesting in and of itself. I tell my family about it, and and of course, you know, I don't know exactly. I can't remember what their response was, but I was ecstatic about it, and just confirmed my ideas that I had about UFOs, that there was a reality behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But but then I told my mom, and this is interesting because my mom is a church-going person, and you know, not given to you know, that subject per se, you know, and UFO subjects per se as I was, and anyway, so I tell my mom the experience, and then out of the blue, she tells me her story, and I think I'll go into that at this time. She had a spectacular sight because first off, it was during the daytime, right before the sun goes down. The sun's still up. It is low, but she's in her backyard looking east, and she sees the silver disc. And this is 1947. So 1947 is the beginning of our modern UFO era.
Right.
And if you remember the whole Kenneth Arnold thing, but that sparks, you know, the whole UFO era. So anyway, so she sees a silver disc, and around the silver disc are spinning these lights, and so and this is about 300 yards. Looking back, I've got some details. It was hovering for a few seconds over the railroad tracks, and so I looked at the map, and about 300 yards to the railroad tracks from her backyard. The railroad tracks go north and south at her particular point, and she said it was hovering basically over the railroad tracks for a few seconds.
Now, when you say hover, was it, you know, 20 feet off the ground, or
that's
half a mile, or
low? And it was low on the horizon, so it wasn't very high because she distinctly saw the disc shape. She saw the lights spinning around it, and so she looks at this object and blinks her eye, and the object vanishes. It's gone.
Wow.
I mean, she's looking all over the sky for it. She's about 15 years old at this time, and but she, and she doesn't remember a sound. But anyway, so she sees this object, and it's interesting because through the years I've talked to her recently about it as well. I mean, I think one of the surprises was that she ended up not telling anybody about it. She just assumed she did, but when she asked her sister, she has one sister, and she asked my dad, which she would have been dating at that time, she didn't tell anybody about this, which turns out to be fairly common. John Keel talks about this. We'll talk about John Keel later, but he calls that lacunar amnesia. It's this temporary kind of forgetting, or if you want to call it amnesia, of this, you know, incident, or of these incidents, and so you just sort of forget it until something triggers. And evidently, what triggered her to tell me was I told her my story, and then she tells me hers, and she at that point tells me a couple other UFO stories from some of her friends. We won't go into that, but anyway, so that kind of introduced me in a big way to the UFO topic.
Well, you know, the fact that it happened in 1947 is, you know, pretty bizarre on its own. But I just kind of wonder how many UFO sightings we were having back then nationwide. I don't think they were that much, was it, back?
Yeah, well, there is what they call a UFO wave in 1947. During the months from June to August, they start to lessen. By the beginning of August, the biggest majority of them were at, I think, June and July.
Okay,
and,
well, of course, we had Roswell in 47, but besides that, I've never heard of any cases, so that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a great paper on the 1947 thing, and do I have that in front of me? If I don't, well, let's see here. Yeah, report on UFO wave of 1947 by Ted Blanchard.
Wow.
And he reports on it in 1967, the 20-year anniversary of the incident. But yeah, speaking about my mom, also going back, she at that time, the word UFO, the word flying saucer, she had never heard of. And so in her mind, and I need to tell you this, in her mind, she's thinking secret military technology. And so, but I even asked her recently, and she said, well, I just call it a UFO, unidentified flying object. But she has, your mind goes to that military option because obviously they're putting stuff up that we don't necessarily know about. I mean, the stealth came in, but by the mid-'80s, we know about it, and now you can see the stealth at, air shows, and so you can get up close to it. But if you look back on that time frame, they floated some options, and one of the big one was the flapjack, flying flapjack, and the only problem with that is the flying flapjack, there were only 2 prototypes, and only one of these gets off the ground, and it does a few hops in Connecticut, but it never does a real flight.
Right.
So, Connecticut, Oklahoma, you can do the math there, but I don't think it's the flying flapjack. I mean, and that's a prop thing anyway, and so how can it be as fast as my mom's? I mean, my mom's was gone in an instant. And anyway, so that's just kind of the background on that. But anyways, like I said, that story kind of blew me away. So.
Yeah, and Gary, the other thing that I find very interesting is that your mom had a sighting, and then you had a sighting. Do you have any children?
I do. I have one son, but he's young, so he's only 5.
Oh, so I'm just wondering if he's due for a sighting here in the next 10, 15 years.
I hear you. So you're talking about a connection, a family connection. Yeah, and my brother he had a sighting as well. So yeah, I hear you. My family has had a little bit of a history here, so I don't know what we can make of that, but I hear you. I think it does kind of run in family lines somewhat.
I do think so. I think they've, actually documented that. To what degree, I don't know, but, and I don't know why it would be either, but very strange.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, there's some theories behind it. Yeah, we don't really know. I mean, but it is interesting. I agree with you. Anyway, even now I think about it, it kind of makes the hair go up because I don't know. I do believe it's a real thing. I mean, I've experienced it. Again, a critic could say, well, it's there's natural or a man-made explanation, but some of these things defy the man-made thing.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been shown conclusively. That idea is not necessarily true.
So from your childhood, these sightings, I take it you continued with your interest in UFOs throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, or did you kind of wean off of it, or?
During the 70s, I did. By the early 80s, I graduated in 81, and whoops, I just sort of gave my age away there. But so by 81, I'm tapered off of it. Not thinking a lot about it, but until the mid 80s, I start hearing some more things, and I start getting back into it. And then I put it aside as I go to college, and then I moved away for a time and came back. But in 2003, some events not related to UFOs kind of got me back into it and into the study of it. And so since 2003, I've been fairly active in some theories and what have you.
So how do we go from childhood sightings to Angelology, Alienology, and Demonology, because that's quite a jump there, Gary.
It is. It seems to be quite a jump, doesn't it? Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the only two options that we popularly know about basically is the man-made natural idea of the objects. Those are the critics that say, no, there's nothing there. On the other side of the coin is, yes, they're there and that they're extraterrestrial. But there does not seem to be a middle ground to the popular ideal. However, if you get into this, you find that is not so. Two gentlemen that had a big influence on my thinking was a man named John Keel, the author of the Mothman Prophecies. Have you got to see that show? By the way, that's also been made into a movie.
I have not. I saw a documentary on the Mothman. That takes place in Virginia, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, I've seen a documentary on it. Very bizarre. They have a statue there erected in the town.
Yeah, they do. I would recommend to all my Facebook friends and whoever else is listening, go watch the movie. Start with the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, because Keel, of course, he passed away in 2007, I think it was, but he said that movie actually did present some of the truth. He said, which is a hard thing to do for Hollywood, but they actually did present some of the ideas that he promoted. But John Keel, but if you make it through the movie, it's a very entertaining movie, but real spooky. But then the book, wow, The Mothman Prophecies. I mean, that thing will blow your doors open, and he gets into everything. And but the biggest thing, I guess, the biggest thing about Keel, I'll read a quote from him here in a minute, but the biggest thing about Keel, if you think about that movie, those who've seen it, you've got an entity called Indrid Cold. He's a extraterrestrial. He's a man, though. He looks like a man. He doesn't look like the normal E.T. Idea of a gray, what have you. But you have Indrid Cold, you have the Mothman, and then you have UFOs. The movie doesn't, it's limited in its scope. It doesn't really get into the UFO thing because really the Mothman Prophecies is really about UFOs. And more than that, it's about what Keel calls demonology. But again, John Keel is not a Christian, but he calls it the way he sees it, and he says it's demonology. But anyway, if you think about those three entities, the UFO, the Indrid Cold, and the Mothman, what Keel is saying is that all three of these are one phenomena, a different frame of reference. In other words, they're able to change, and they're flexible. They can change shape. Their craft changes shapes. Their entities change shapes. The Mothman was really a monster, which fits into ufology quite well. But John Keel, let me give a quick quote from John Keel, because he, again, was a big influence. Let me give it, it's kind of somewhat, it's a few words, but anyway, let me read it. It says, but if we want to be properly cautious and objective, we find ourselves facing a double-barreled dilemma. On the one hand, all the real facts of the situation, the manifestations, and the physical effects of the phenomenon seem to point to a negative paraphysical explanation. That paraphysical explanation is his middle ground approach between UFOs don't exist and UFOs are from planet extraterrestrial. Anyway, continuing with the quote, the UFOs do not seem to exist as tangible, manufactured objects. They do not conform to the accepted natural laws of our environment. They seem to be nothing more than transmogrifications, the big word, an occult word, tailoring themselves to our abilities to understand. Last sentence, the thousands of contacts with the entities indicate that they are liars and put-on artists. UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations, the age-old demonological phenomenon. So that's a mouthful, but you get the idea of where he's coming from.
Right.
What he believes the the UFO is, because in his studies, I mean, he studies ancient religions, and he traveled kind of the world and saw many, many things, and he was able to, in his theory, combine all the weirdness of this UFO phenomenon and other paranormal things under one umbrella, and this is what he called the paraphysical hypothesis, as opposed to the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
So what he's saying is that these sightings are demon based, right?
Or what? Say that again, or what? I didn't hear that word.
Demon. They're demon based.
Yes, he would. Again, he's not a Christian. He's not coming from a biblical perspective. However, he studied the Bible, and so he makes the connections with the Bible. Yes, he would say it's all the same phenomenon. Demonology, ufology. In fact, ufology. He described himself not as a ufologist, but as a demonologist, because I mean, the stuff that he uncovered, what the entities say, what they look like, what their craft do, what they do, how they affect us. Really, he connects it more with possession than anything.
I see.
And another movie that points that out is The Fourth Kind. I don't know if you've seen that movie, The Fourth Kind, but that movie, wow! I mean, what else can you call that? Extraterrestrial, but stuff, but possession. I mean, that's basically what that movie kind of put forward. So, but yes, I would agree with that. I think that's how Keel would come up with his answer.
Now, when you were studying this explanation,
Yep.
I take it made sense to you. You've adopted the same type of belief, I take it?
Well, I come from a Christian perspective, so but Keel, interesting. Keel would say, yeah, you're a Christian, and you would see the demon side of it. He calls them demons. However, he thinks that's the religious, quote unquote, explanation. The way he would say it, yes, they're demons, but these things are multidimensional, and he called them ultra-terrestrials, is what he called them, ultra-terrestrials. In other words, they live parallel to us in another dimension.
Right.
Now this part he can't really prove, but this is just part of his explanation. But he believes that the one thing that he can show, though, is that these things pass back and forth. They seem to slip in and slip out of our three dimensions, because you have the vanishing UFOs, and we can get into that in a minute. But you have all these weird psychic things that happen with UFOs that he ties all together.
Yes,
So anyway.
Go ahead.
No, so back to the question: did I adopt his theory? Yes, the paraphysical hypothesis fits, but I come from a Christian perspective, so that's the reason why it shocked me. I'm thinking, well, this guy is not a believer. I'll read you a quote from my second guy that influenced me too, but who is not also a believer. But it's weird. He's explaining the same thing that I have seen in my study of the Bible, or what I call the old text, because in my perspective, the Bible is ancient, and it has universal appeal. I mean, it's able to talk across cultures, across time, and across language barriers, and so to me that's pretty powerful stuff. But anyway, but he saw that, and I'm thinking, wow. And that really, those kind of ideas took me away from the extraterrestrial theory back to the biblical idea of demonology. And an angelology. But
I'm just wondering, and this is just a thought. I'm wondering if you would have been so quick to adopt his definition if you were not a Christian.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah.
And it's just curious because we tend to look at things from our own perspective and our own mindset.
Yeah.
But
I hear you. If that's I hear you. That's a fair question. I don't know. Maybe not. However, I think in a minute when we get to another man that would influence me, we'll start seeing some really weird things, and they really looked at all the UFO reports and kind of came up with what they call the 6 layers of anomalous phenomenon, and that really, again, is not from a Christian perspective, but what it does, it looks at all of the evidence. It doesn't look at just a piece of it that shows, the popular extraterrestrial viewpoint. I mean, because their viewpoint is that what we're seeing are craft that are nuts and bolts. I mean, it's a spacecraft from another planet,
right.
Another exoplanet from another star, and that they're highly advanced. Maybe perhaps millions of years advanced, and they see the silver disc of 1947 fit into that. I mean, because this time my mom saw a real object. What I saw were just luminous lights. I saw no physical body to
right.
craft. I had my binoculars on it, and I didn't see it. So my experience when I started listening to Keels, and the second man is Jacques Vallée. We'll get into that in a minute, but Jacques Vallée also saw more than just the nuts and bolts of a flying, spacecraft. And I don't know if we want to jump into him yet, or if you're finished with Keel, we could jump into him, but if you're not, we can keep going.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead and jump into him.
Keel, okay, now, so we talked about Keel. The next man is Jacques Vallée. Now, Jacques Vallée was, if you remember, I'll take it back to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The French scientist that is the big person in that movie was modeled after the real live French scientist Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is still alive, and he's a computer PhD. This guy comes more from a scientific viewpoint. Again, not a Christian.
Is he known for his study into UFOs, or was UFO a side thing for it?
Yes, he's really known for UFOs. However, I mean, he's made a big contribution to yours and my industry, the computer industry.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, he was part of the ARPANET, the early internet
right.
version of what we know as a superhighway today. He was part of that whole thing, and he helped to contribute a lot of scientific knowledge to that sphere. So, his colleagues would know him as a PhD computer guy. He was also had a master's in astrophysics. So this guy, he's pretty well versed on the science side. However, he was willing to research UFO cults, which was a big no-no. I mean, not until now in the 70s. In the 70s, there was an open door to considering what are the contactees. Now, the contactee is a person who has multiple sightings of UFOs and have multiple encounters with entities.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell them, and they do stuff to them. And but he was willing to jump into that and research it and say, is there any validity to what these guys are saying? But the scientific ufologists, those today and past, they wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. In fact, they separated it off and said, no, there's no correlation here. These guys are wackos or whatever.
Well, I think they still do, most of them. The
Yeah,
overwhelming, I mean, it's getting a little looser, but, scientists generally do not talk about religion, nor do they talk about UFOs. Either one. They don't.
I hear you. But anyway, Jacques Vallée, I'll give a quick, now this is a little quicker quote from him. Here's his quote. I propose that the UFO we see is a device which creates a distortion of the witness's reality. First you have this distortion. That it does so for a purpose, which is to project images or fabricated scenes designed to change our belief systems. I'll continue on, and that the technology we observe is only the incidental support for a worldwide enterprise of subliminal seduction. That was from Messengers of Deception. Now, he's talking about belief systems. Again, scientists, like you just said, they don't want to get into that. They want to see, something that is repeatable, and they want to see the crap, they want to experiment on it, what have you,
Well, now, he says that the goal of these entities or whatever is to change one's belief system.
Right.
He doesn't mention from what belief to what other belief. He just says change it, right?
Right.
He's not.
Right.
Okay, got you.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. He does not say. Yeah. In his book, Messengers of Deception, he gives principles that get close to the answer, but he doesn't give the final answer because in the end, he thinks the best theory is from another book he wrote, which was called Passport to Magonia. And Magonia was a city in the clouds where fairies and elves, and we think of fiction and mythology when we think of those. But in the day, people believed in those entities, and what he did, it's really a wild book. But he takes that book and shows where they're doing some of the same things that the UFOs are doing to us today, like abduction, like flying triangle objects, etc. And there's also in those cases missing time. That's a biggie in modern ufology, is the missing time piece. But so his theory says, hard to prove it scientifically, but he can show a historical parallel. He says, look, it's more not the alien from another planet. It's more like, wow, this is something that's been with us since the beginning of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that it hides its source. It doesn't, and its origin. They've given every kind of planet and star as their origin, but they're all contradictory. And it's a deliberate deception on their part, it seems, because you can't come up with any one answer. You get all these different answers of who they are.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about UFOs and ETs being from some other planet or some other galaxy, I think that's a very easy answer to the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
For human beings, I think, okay, well, they traveled from point A to point B, because that's the kind of world we live in, a point A to point B world. When you get into the multi-dimensional aspects of things, you lose people sometimes. I guess that's just a little too much for them to fathom, And I think a lot of it, is based on the movies and the books that we've read. But personally, the possible answer that they are interdimensional, if there is such a thing, I think is very possible. I think it is a very possible answer.
I agree, and what we have to do is try to put together all the evidence. Let me just go through now. Jacques Vallée, again, this is Jacques Vallée, and he wrote a paper in 2003. I think I've sent it to you, but it's the 6-layer model that they came up with. And let me quickly go through that. And basically what this does is summarize all of our knowledge about UFOs since the beginning. And we find some things that we can understand and some things that don't fit our perspective of space and time. And let me just go through those. This was written in 2003, as I said. He is the author, and also Eric Davis, a PhD in physics. Let's go through the 6 layers.
Now, is this from the person that was a computer PhD?
Yes, and astrophysics.
When you said layers, I just wondered if he took that concept from the OSI layers.
I agree. Yeah, I hear you. That might fit, and maybe that's where he came from. That's a good point.
Very possible.
I hadn't thought about it. I haven't thought about the network. All the layers that are in networking and communication. That's a great point, actually. Layer 1, the physical layer. This layer is, yes, the UFO seems to be physical. It leaves indentions in the ground. It leaves burn marks, radiation, things that we can measure. The light has a certain absorption and emission that we can estimate what the power, how much power it has. You can take pictures of it, etc. So it does have a physical layer. So those who think, oh gosh, you just think it's all in your mind, no. I think there is a physical part to it, but we need to continue on. Layer 2. Layer 2 is the anti-physical layer. Now this layer, this conflicts with our modern physics because you get things like this. The UFO sinks into the ground. The UFO shrinks in size. It grows larger. It changes shape. It's polymorphic. It changes shape. It's not like, I love Star Trek and I love the Starship Enterprise, but that thing is physical and it stays the same shape. We see it, boom. So, but what we see in the skies, they change shape. They become fuzzy and transparent on the spot. They divide into 2 or more craft, or several merge into one. You can visually see it, but the radar person does not see a radar blip, or vice versa. They see the radar blip, but the person who's on the ground, in the area doesn't. They produce missing time. That time dilation thing, that was really opened up to us by Einstein and his theories. And those are scientific theories that he has. But the time dilation thing, where the missing time, that just does not compute with, what we see in the real world. So that's the anti-physical layer. That's the weirdness that we see physically that happens with it. Layer 3 is the psychological layer, and that is the objects that we perceive as non-conventional. We try to explain them in as a common occurrence, like my mom saying, okay, that's secret military device, or hey, that's a meteor, even though it makes a 90-degree turn or something, we'll say stuff like that. We have to make this psychological thing, we have to make it understandable in our own mind.
Right.
And so that's the 3rd layer. The 4th layer is the physiological reactions. We hear the weird beepings, the buzzings, the hummings, vibrations, burns, partial paralysis, extreme heat or cold sensation, odors. That's a big one. Metallic taste, pricklings, temporary blindness, nausea, bloody nose, etc.
So,
yes, go ahead.
So what he is saying is that these objects could produce, say, burns to human skin, right?
Right. That's just saying, of all the reports we have, there have been many reports of burns.
Exactly.
Or people who are blinded for a time. That's indicative of high radioactivity. I mean, you get a sunburn in your eyes, turn red or whatever. That's these objects and the beings that come out of these objects can cause some of these things that we just read there. And that was layer 4. Layer 5 is the weird one. It kind of correlates with the anti-physical layer. And this one is, they call it the psychic layer. Now, in this layer, I mean, we get impressions of communication from either the UFO or these entities. I mean, telepathy, poltergeist phenomenon. Now, the Mothman Prophecies book by John Keel, man, he opens that door, and that's the reason. Be real careful when you read that book, because keep all your lights on, because I mean, you've got all kinds of weird poltergeist activity in that book, and supposedly real stuff that's happening to people. But you have levitation of the witnesses or objects. You have maneuvers of the UFO appearing to anticipate the witnesses' thoughts. They think something and they do it. You've got dreams and visions. I've had some of those weird, not visions, but dreams, just weird UFO dreams. Personality changes. You go from non-belief to belief to, just you can become really wacko. In fact, a lot of people have lost their mind, and that's no joking matter. A lot of people have lost their mind dealing with this stuff.
Yeah, especially like the abductees folks,
And that's where that's one of the areas where this possession thing comes in, because it's precisely what happens in the recorded cases of possessions, and that's really, really spooky stuff. And so I just warn everybody, be careful. Last little category on this one, layer 4 or 5, is the healings that happen, supposed healings that can happen. So that's a weird deal. That layer and the anti-physical layer, those are the layers that the scientific ufologist, like Frank Warren of UFO Chronicles. I'm not putting these guys down. I'm just giving examples. Peter Davenport of newfork.org. That's the kind of things that they don't like to hear. If you bring that, man, it's like change the subject. I've had a few emails, and they don't, I understand where they're coming from too, but it's weird, because you have to, if you want to really come up with the answer, you have to include it, at least from Jock's perspective. And then layer 6, the last one, is a cultural layer. And that one, the biggest thing from that is the impact of the phenomenon on the general acceptance of the idea of life in space. That, yes, I can understand now that there probably are beings that live in another galaxy, on another star, etc. And that's one of the biggest cultural things that's happening with that layer. Anyway, those are some. That's the model that they came up with, and again, it's a culmination of all the evidence.
Well, I mean, I definitely see similarities between, say, demonology and things that seem to occur during UFO sightings, abductions, contact, what have you. Now, is there a specific connection with the angel part of the equation?
Well, let's talk about that. We can come back to the alien side, because again, that's the big theory. But the angel, well, demons. What are demons? From the biblical record of the Old Text, the Judeo-Christian background, a demon or a fallen angel was once an angel that that lived with God and did God's will. They were messengers. Now, they're not physical as we would say. I mean, the Bible, the Old Text says that they were spiritual beings. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have a body. It just means they don't have a DNA-based body.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they have a body that does things that we can't even imagine. In fact, I mean, a lot of the angelology stuff, the heritage of the Old Text is that some of the things the UFO entities are doing are precisely what angels have been described as being able to do. And so really a demon goes against God, and in doing so fell and became a fallen angel, and for whatever reason, and this is in God's hands, for whatever reason God allowed it. And I think it's because he gave free choice to humans, and he also gave free choice to his angels. But anyway, so...
well, let me ask you a question here.
Yes, sure.
So, could it be possible that, from what you're saying is that all of these UFOs that we're seeing are somehow, demon-based entities that can transmogrify into any shape, any light, etc., etc.
Right.
Is it possible that may be true in some instances, but then there are some UFO sightings that are actually more of your standard ET type? I mean, could ETs exist alongside these demons within this thing we call the universe, or do you feel that every single UFO sighting is nothing more than some type of demon entity?
Well, there are Christians that would hold to that viewpoint, that yes, that there are other beings, and it can't. I don't think it can be totally ruled out. I guess the way I would summarize my position would be that the great majority of the UFOs, especially the entity cases, are demonological because they're doing things that the angelic host would not do, like things like causing injury. Well, I take that back. I mean, God has demanded, in the Old Text. I mean, you do see where God allows his angels to carry out a judgment, and so they do. They are able to kill or to maim. But
we haven't really seen any UFO or ET type of activity where they have specifically gone to hurt someone. I mean, I haven't heard of any. Now maybe they get too close and they get burned by exhaust or some type of radiation from these craft. Now the experimentation, not sure if you could classify that as causing damage to a person or not, but
well, I would on that point. I mean, that was one of the places I was going, was the abduction reports. If you, they're not very nice to them. I mean, they seem to not really care about physical well-being of the person. I mean, they come back with all kinds of psychological, problems. I mean, they start having nightmares, and they start remembering, especially under hypnosis. And if you ever listen to a recording, there is fear in a lot of these people's voice. I mean, there's a real fear.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, and it's more than being confronted with something they don't know. They describe what they're doing. They're sticking needles through my nose membrane. They're sticking needles in my eye. I feel it. It hurts. Stop. So you do hear that. So that's one. That's one big area. I mean, that's the abduction thing. That's where the 1980s differed from the 70s. I mean, the 70s you heard these things, but in the 80s, wow, it took off. Whitley Strieber, 1987, the Communion. Wow, they said they were sticking stuff up, his rear end and all kinds of. That's vulgar, but I mean, it's just weird.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just the truth, yeah.
And but Jacques has also wrote a book about it's called Confrontations, and he records where in South America, and he says there were people that actually died from it, but he said he couldn't make the cause and effect exactly to that, but he definitely can show where there was real harm, and they were being shot by weapons, if you want to call it, laser-like weapons, and being shot and actually burning their body and
wow,
becoming sick. And yeah, this stuff is nothing to mess with. I mean, Keel says it's like messing with black magic. I mean, you got to be really careful when you get into this stuff because, I mean, look, if the theory that these things, for the most part, are demons, then we got a real problem because they're telling us information that hides really who they are. I mean, they're saying, "Hey, look, we're from another planet. We can do these seeming miracles. We can do,
Yeah, we're going to help your civilization, etc., etc."
Exactly. I mean, I love the clip you have on your website, The Day the Earth was Stood Still. I love that movie. That was a great movie, but I have to put it in context. I mean, for me it was entertainment and fun. I love science fiction for the fun value, but if we really get deep into this and want to analyze it, that is what a lot of these beings are saying they are, but they don't really come out with real hard evidence. They don't want us to really have physical evidence, although some would argue, well, we've got fractured ships or what have you. But I mean, is that really mainstream? Do we really know? I think there will be a day we will know. I think basically the day will come when the ET will come to Earth and they will basically, to the scientific world, prove anything that they want proven, so that our great minds, Hawking, whoever, the great skeptics, the great physics people will be utterly convinced. I do believe there's coming a day of that, but today there's not. It's this, I get a feeling it's this, or I get a feeling it's that, but there's no real evidence that these beings come from another planet. I mean, Jock points out, hey, look, there are far too many of these to be coming from another planet. I mean, he did a statistical study of this. He said if we extrapolate, there would be millions of encounters and millions of visitations by these beings on Earth. So he says there are far too many of them. Their medical exams are just bizarre. They're absurd. I mean, he said even our medicine is much better than theirs. I mean, because they come back with nosebleeds, things in their nose. They come back, they remember things. I mean, if they're really supposed to forget it, I mean, don't you think a civilization that's a million years ahead of us can keep us where we wouldn't remember it? But it's really kind of a joke thing. I think they
or perform painless surgery or something like that. Why would there be pain involved?
Right. And why the blood and why the DNA thing? Look, one of the things Jock points out is, look, if they really wanted our DNA, they could go over the Mayo Clinic where there's a huge, store of DNA and sperm. They could just get it.
Well, I think they've been around, you know, even if we said 1947, they've been here for over 60 years.
Yes,
They
right.
should have gotten enough DNA now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and they go back, really, Rick, they go back to the beginning. I mean, there are UFO reports back in the beginning. I mean, of recorded time. We've got paintings of these things.
I know.
On caves.
We have a guy coming on here on one of our next shows who's going to be talking about ancient astronaut theory, and you know, a lot of that has to do with exactly what you're saying. And I'll tell you, Gary, you know, your explanation to me opens up a lot of questions towards the standard quote unquote ET and UFO explanation. And one thing that I have definitely come to realize since doing this show now for the last couple of months is that there are just a plethora of different opinions out there of what these things are, right?
Right.
I do see a lot of people tend to look at this the same way you do. I'm not sure if it's religious based or if it's based on something else. But there just seems to be a large percentage of the people I talk to have a non-standard explanation for what seems to be occurring. You know, I think the approach to this with the 6 layers is a fascinating way to do this. I think it's a great way to do it. Break it down into component parts, and then, you know, look at it at those levels. Pretty amazing stuff, and it definitely makes you want to look into it more. At least it does me.
I hear you. No, I hear you, and I agree with that statement. And you know, there are many ideas out there, but I think as far as the Christians, the Christian view, where I really connect this is with biblical prophecy, the Old Text prophecies, and I do see a time in the future. If you read, it's interesting. If you read the Book of Revelation, most people say, "Wow, that thing, who can understand it?" But if you look at it from a certain perspective, if you look at it from a first century description of future things, let's say today, our time frame, we're in the time frame when, you know, all these things are going to culminate and end, basically, if you want to put it like that. I mean, they would be describing things in our sky like black helicopters, you know, tanks, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you would get, and so you see the symbolic language in the Book of Revelation, but it can be interpreted as the modern things. And if you see it like that, wow, it opens up a whole door of understanding.
Well, you know, I think Nostradamus, you know, did the same thing. And I think he was pretty much predicting the same type of ending, if you want to put it that way. Right. Well, I tell you, Gary, I found our discussion to be absolutely fascinating, and I definitely would like to have you come on again sometime, and we'll get down to this even deeper. But we've reached our hour here. Is there any last comment you would like to make to everyone, or?
Yeah, I would. I'll just say this. I could sum it up like this. There's a big coincidence that I think, whether you're religious or not, and by the way, I'm a Christian, but I'm not a religious Christian. I'm not really into, you know, a lot of the symbol stuff. I mean, I believe, you know, from my perspective, it's a relationship with God, and so it's a one-on-one thing, and so and it's real. But anyway, from my perspective, where was I going? Oh, yes. There's a big coincidence out there I would like you to consider, and that is 1947 was the beginning of the modern era of ufology. It wasn't the beginning of ufology, again, I said, and everybody else has noted that it goes back to the beginning. But what was different is we gave the extraterrestrial perspective to that in 1947, and that's when it really took off. And so there's a big coincidence. The super sign, if you will, of prophecy in the Bible is Israel. In Israel, everything seems to orbit around Israel. All the happenings in the book of Revelation, wherever you want to look at it, it all centers around Israel. And there's a big coincidence that in 1947 and 48 is the beginning of the state of Israel, and they came back to the land. They were gone for millions. They were gone for thousands of years, a couple thousand, whatever, a few hundred. Well, I mean, several hundred, however you want to look at it. And they're back in the land. That's a massive miracle. But that's a big coincidence that those two occurred at the same time. And see, from my perspective, that has big significance. So anyway, I just have my friends out there look at that, study it. Don't disregard it just offhand because you think, well, I'm not a Christian. I hear you on that. I mean, I'm not trying to, force anybody into anything. I'm just saying look at the evidence. That's how I would end it.
Well, I think that's what we all need to do. We definitely need to look at the evidence. So many people just turn their head and because of ego or whatever, don't take the time to look at some of these other explanations, because even if you don't believe in someone's explanation completely, there's always something you can get out of that. And, I think that's what's kind of cool about this show is that we do have different people on with different ideas and different theories. And, just might turn out that one of us had it right,
I hear you.
Well, listen, Gary, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And maybe when we have you on again, we'll get more into this Israel 1947 thing. I'd like to talk about that some more as well. So
sure, that'd be great. And if anybody wants to go to my website, I've got a website out there, www.technoprophecy.com, and I think you'll have it up on your site. But that kind of gives a little bit of some more information that I have. So
yes, that's technoprophecy, all one word, .com.
Yes.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, and I'll definitely will have that on my site the next day or so. So, Gary, have a wonderful evening, and stand by for a second. I'm going to go ahead and shut the show down, and I'll talk to you offline.
Okay.
All right? Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into the whole UFO alien phenomenon.
Sure. Yeah, well, it goes back a ways for me, about age 10. Now, this is in the 1970s, but age 10, I think I'm fourth grade, whatever, but I get a little book called The Gizmo from Outer Space, kind of a funny title. Of course, it's written to the fourth grade level, but it had a distinct UFO topic that it dealt with. I mean, basically, the boy finds a gizmo. It's a radio communication device, and he communicates with aliens. But the illustrations are interesting because he has his best friend with him, and they're at their desk, and they've got their crystal radio set, and one of the books that's sitting on their desk is a little book called UFOs in the Universe. I don't think that book actually exists, but anyway, so yeah, that little book was kind of the introduction for me into this subject. I didn't really see it as that. I was just reading it as a fun book, but by the age of 30, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's what spurred your curiosity.
Yes.
At the very beginning, huh? Okay, great.
Yeah. And then by age 13, now this would be 1977, and I don't know how old you are, but in 1977, I'm 13 years old, and I'm already buying a few copies of Saga's UFO Report magazine. That was a popular magazine back there, and back then, and off the newsstand, I would buy it. At the little market, and so I'm reading stories about UFOs and aliens, and this is also at the time of the Carpenters. If you remember, they had a hit single called "Calling Occupants from Interplanetary Craft." So they're singing that, and then 1977 November, Close Encounters of the Third Kind come out. Now I'm sure you've seen that.
Absolutely, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, and in fact, recently I was with my brother and dad, and we were kind of surfing through the television, and in between basketball games, and we watched half of the Close Encounters. So I kind of got a reintroduction to Close Encounters. But anyway, so at that time, I'm 13, and I'm also clipping newspaper articles because UFOs were being reported on fairly commonly at that time, and so I'm clipping newspaper articles. And then in the winter of 1978, I'm outside alone. I'm home alone. I'm home, and Dad and brother are at my brother's baseball game, and I'm looking at the stars. I have an interest in amateur astronomy even back then, and even today. I've got a telescope today. Back then, I'm pretty much just naked eye and sometimes binoculars, but I'm outside observing stars and wishing to see one of those lights in the sky. And in the west, I see two red lights pulsating. And I'm fairly familiar with the skies and also the air traffic because we're close, or at least we're in the lane of the Tulsa International Airport. And we live in a suburb of Tulsa, but they would come over close to our house, and so I watched airplanes, and this somehow looked weird. This object coming from the west, going directly east, coming toward me, and so I run in the house really fast to get my pair of binoculars, and by that time, this object, I take it that was your first UFO or true UFO experience, right? Yes.
And what kind of feelings did you have? I know you were young at the time, but what did it make you feel like?
Well, for one, I didn't think it was man-made. I had this distinct feeling it was not man-made. Not only because of my observations. Number one, it made no sound, and number two, when I look at the lights. I mean, there's nothing in between the lights. I mean, they're just two, if you want to say, globes of light pulsating. And so, I mean, it's dark in between. I mean, it's pitch black between the objects. And so, not only that, but I just get the distinct feeling that this object was not of our Earth. And so that's probably the biggest feeling I had about it. Looking back, even now in my, many years of thinking about it, I still don't think that there's a military source to what I saw. There always could be, because mine didn't make any fantastic, maneuvers like so many of them what I've been reported to do. But
Right.
the silent thing, I have heard ufologists say that in the 1970s we had no silent craft, in the skies, and so I'm pretty certain that it wasn't man-made.
Now, did you tell anybody? Did you tell anyone in your family about it? And if so, what was their response?
Well, yeah, it was interesting in and of itself. I tell my family about it, and of course, I don't know exactly. I can't remember what their response was, but I'm going to call it two objects because at first they look just like the red pulsating lights on a Cessna airplane, maybe, on the edges of each wing. That was probably the distance, it seemed to me, apart that these objects were. But when I put the binoculars on the object, I see that there's no airplane, there's no anything. I mean, you just have these two pulsating lights that are very strange. And then the biggest thing that really caused my hair to go up on my skin and back of the neck was there was no sound. I mean, absolutely no sound. We lived in a suburb, very quiet back then, and our little town was not very many people, so there weren't machines or anything running. But I mean, there's absolutely no to this object. And so, by the time I get the binoculars on, look at it for a few seconds, it's about over my head at this time. It begins to bank right even with my backyard, and so it banks south. So it's coming west-east, makes this very slow banking 90-degree turn, not 45, not 33-degree. I mean, it's a 90-degree turn that it makes, so that that takes out the possibility of one of those candles in the plastic bag gags that they used to do in those days.
Right.
But you know what I mean. So this object was weird, and so it makes this banking turn, and then I just watch it disappear into the south, and and all the time I'm giving this international peace sign to it, hoping that this thing would stop and land. But looking back, I'm glad
but no luck, huh? It didn't happen.
I'm glad because I'm not sure what would have come out of that thing.
So
but anyway,
when you saw this. Hey everyone, welcome to Topic UFO. We've got a great guest on tonight. Gary from Oklahoma is here tonight on the phone with us, and he is going to be talking about really three different subjects: alienology, angelology, and demonology. And I have a feeling that by the end of the interview, we'll see how those three subjects come together. But I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm just going to bring him on, and we'll get talking about this. So, Gary, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Gary.
Hey.
How's it going tonight?
Going good.
Great.
Yeah.
So, Gary, you're here tonight to talk to us about three distinct different topics: alienology, angelology, and demonology. Am I supposed to understand that those somehow all three go together, or will we get to that later in the conversation?
Yeah, I think we'll get to it later on, but sneak preview is, yes, I would say there is a deep connection between the three, and so we'll just kind of see how it unfolds. But yes, that would be my short answer on that one.
Great. Well, listen, Gary, why don't you start off and